Part 3 of this lecture will look at whether we are investing in the right places and kind of talk about options thinking, kind of more a way to incorporate uncertainty in how we approach IT investments. So let's look at analyzing your IT portfolio and understanding whether your firm is investing the right amounts in the right place. Now, we must examine our entire portfolio of IT assets, including apps, infrastructure that provide technology foundations such as the internet connectivity, the hardware, the data storage used by the applications. Apps can be operational, which will streamline and automate business processes, operations, or strategic, which foster competitive advantage over rivals, allowing you to access new markets. And it's the ideal portfolio depends on industry to industry. Some industries are more infrastructure heavy, others are more application heavy, and IT spending as a percentage of revenue we'll look at different industries, and we'll kind of analyze how this works, and let's look at the difference between what top performers invest and what's the average investments. 70% of IT assets, close to 70%, is in infrastructure, which never provides competitive advantage. However, you need to have your infrastructure in place before you can start using your other assets. Now remember that one size does not fit all. You have to look at your strategic imperatives. If your strategic aspirations are low-cost provider, you need to focus on operational efficiency, automation, supply chain management. But if you're looking at differentiation strategy, then the focus is on strategic applications. But the important thing to remember is that how much you spend is less important than how you spend it. So let's look at some IT spending patterns. We have here, and as you can see, we have IT infrastructure. This is the asset class, operational and strategic. And we have industry sectors of manufacturing, service, and retail. And this big block is your top performers, how they spend. And here the thin one in blue is your industry average. And you'll notice that there are some really striking, interesting patterns here. So whether it's manufacturing, service, or retail, average is about 65 to 70% are invested in infrastructure. And here is the industry average, and you can see here's what the top performers invest in. And then you'll notice that manufacturing spends more in operational apps, whereas services spend a lot more in strategic apps. So here it's about 20 to 25% here, whereas here it's about 19 to 20%. Manufacturing is also slightly less infrastructure heavy than other industries. As you can see, other industries are closer to 70%, whereas manufacturing is close to 65%. Second, notice in each industry which IT assets the top performing firms invest less in and more in other asset classes. So take a look at manufacturing and infrastructure. Industry average is 67%, but top performers only invest about 64%, whereas on the operational side, it's flipped. In the services industry, on the other hand, and in retail, infrastructure, top performers invest more in infrastructure than the industry average. And you can see they are pretty close here. There's not that wide gap between top performers and industry average, except here in retail, strategic is not as much as what the industry average is. So these are interesting patterns to take a look at, and you have to be careful from drawing too much from this. It needs a deeper study, and it also need to tie into your strategic aspirations. So you want to be careful about reading too much into it and just saying, okay, top performers are investing more here and therefore in our industry and therefore we should do it. No, but it is an interesting aspect to take a look at. So we're finally coming to maybe a possible solution on how to think about IT investments. Because IT investments are fraught with uncertainty, we talked about the time lag before the investment potential can be realized. We talked about a whole bunch of things which the current way of evaluating investments doesn't work. And we're kind of focusing on real options thinking, which helps manage the high risk, high return IT investments. Now, this is a process rather than the quantification, and it views uncertainty as unavoidable but manageable part of IT strategy. Recognizing uncertainty helps you handle and manage it, and it allows a flexible pursuit of high risk projects without overcommitting to new unproven technologies or ideas with uncertain business benefits. So before we get into this, let's look at the problems with net present value creates. Now, net present value is an important tool. Just because we're talking about disadvantage does not mean that the advantages which accrue by using this tool vanish. So normally when you're evaluating something, you got to kind of have a portfolio of metrics. Again, few metrics, but you should have more than one. Net present value is clearly the time value of benefits minus cost. And it's a workhorse. A lot of people use it, but there is no place for uncertainty. And so it can be misleading when uncertainty in IT project prevents you from reliably estimating costs or benefits. And it does become dysfunctionally conservative. Conservatism is good, be careful, but then it actually increases the chance that you're going to reject a strategically promising IT project. And real options is an antidote which actually allows you to exploit uncertainty and gives you flexibility to do something in future without having to do it right now. And it also provides you a ceiling on the losses on risky bets but preserves their upside. IT assets differ from capital assets in three ways. One, they are inherently malleable or changeable, and this allows and there's near zero reproduction cost. So, and the third part is you don't have to discontinue original use if you're when a copy is put to a different use. This is particularly true for digital assets, and it has a versatility of not yet possible future uses. Example is using broadband networks to stream video that nobody really thought of using it. So you'll find that once it's invested, there are other benefits, uses of a particular investment which nobody had originally thought possible. So real options thinking allows us, it takes the net present value, conventional net present value, but also looks at the value of real options in a project. And if there is no value of real options in the project, that is the flexibility to do something in the future without being obligated to do it right now, if that's zero, then it's the same as the net present value. So multiple options can be simultaneously embedded in a project. Some exist naturally, others can be created up front. Opportunities often come up in complex IT projects because of evolving technology and unpredictable markets. The greater the uncertainty, the lengthier the project, and this increases options value of the project. And there are two types of uncertainty which demand different approaches. First is technical uncertainty, and this is when you have immature technologies with unclear trajectories prone to integration hazards. And now this is a technical issue. For some of you have attended the certificate in emerging technologies, and some of this is addressed there in that program. And then we have, because these are new technologies, it requires cautious baby steps. And then we have market uncertainty, which arises from being unsure how the market will react to your project. Now, your market is your customers, partners, your competitors. How will they react to this? And it requires a wait-and-see approach, raising the hurdle rates, or good project management. It's an important step there. So we're going to talk about 6 flavors of real options. Now, they can be strategic or operational. A project's strategic growth has a strategic growth option if it provides a foundation or a platform for unrelated follow-on projects that cannot be yet anticipated. Strategic options exist primarily in infrastructural IT investments that serve as a platform for other projects. Such options are obvious in the hindsight, but difficult to kind of predict when you're actually in that project. Operational options create flexibility in how you implement a project. And we can look at, the 5 flavors are defer, if you can delay it without forsaking the market opportunity. Stage, which can be broken into a number of independent steps. Scale, scaling up or scaling down. Switching, repurposing for a different use. And finally, abandoned, terminated, possibly with some salvage value. So here is an example. Let's go through each one. Deferring, and how it creates value is it reduces the risk of being a first mover when the market repetitivity is uncertain. The problem with this is misjudging this can lock you out of the competitive race. If too many people are already in and you're too late, you've already lost the value for it and you are way behind. So you've got to be careful about how long you want to delay a project. Staging, breaking it into individual sequence, completing each baby project reduces ambiguity about the value of doing the next one. Each is pursued only if the outcome of the preceding one warrants. So risky, huge projects become baby projects with demonstrable benefits. However, it is important here, and the problem which you can fall into is failing to make a baby sub-project independent of the later one. So you've got to be careful that each sub-project is independent of later ones. Third one we talked about was scaling, and we can cost effectively scale up without increasing complexity. And here your application architecture often creates a bottleneck. If you don't choose that carefully, this becomes your bottleneck for scalability, and we talked about it in the 3rd chapter. Finally, switching, there's one more. Finally, switching, repurposing for a different use, or swapping out key building blocks. So unlike physical assets such as a factory, you can simply clone a software asset for switched use without discontinuing original use. Example, app used Mac OS as its foundation for creating iOS, then watch OS. It could concurrently keep alive its original use. A switch option can be embedded using Lego-like modular IT infrastructure. The key difference between a switch and a strategic growth option is that the latter uses the original project as a foundation to create a new unrelated asset. And the problem in switching is if you have a non-modular design, then what happens is you increase complexity, and we talked about the dangers of increasing complexity in the previous chapter. And finally, a project can be abandoned or terminated midstream and its resources salvaged for other use. Although in theory you can abandon any project, you have issues of sunk cost, there is prestige linked with it, there's political pressure that can make it harder to kill even a doomed project. And now this is very difficult to do because a lot of people have a lot of emotional investments in some projects. Escalation of commitment to doom projects is more common because human nature is to fight rationality. The single way to embed an abandonment option is for non-IT managers to predefine project exit criteria using objectively quantifiable milestone and then hand over the kill switch to a non-IT manager outside the project team, because there is huge amount of emotional investment and it's very hard for people who are in that project to actually do the kill switch. So let's look at an example of options use. Practicing real options thinking requires non-IT managers' vigilance to both actively embed real options in IT projects and use their judgment to exercise flexibility that they provide. So here's an example. We are assume you want to have 3 chunks of functionality: online ordering, in-store inventory checking, and returns management, right? And assume that you expect the project to take 3 months to generate $3 million in additional revenues, equally attributed across these chunks of functionality. Traditional way to do it is to take a big bang approach. If all goes well, then the project would be completed after the 3rd month, after which it would deliver $3 million payoff. But all going well in IT projects is a unicorn, right? I mean, it's really very hard. When we first started this class, we talked about how many IT projects fail and the high failure rate. So if something goes wrong after the 1st month of the project, insurmountable technical problems, your firm would have nothing to show for the money already spent. Staging is low-cost insurance against such risks. So let's look at options here. You can dramatically lower the risk if you decompose the same project into 3 sequentially staged baby steps. So let's take a look. First stage is essentially what is must do, what you have to do, right? And a later stage, so if there's a huge glitch, you can reevaluate here. And then the second stage could be what you may do in store, and then you essentially when ordering is completed, maybe the app generates $1 million payoff automatically, all right? And that's an example. And the next 2 stages are may do's, in-store inventory and returns, and then you can kind of see if there's a payoff, or if there's a huge glitch which is insurmountable, you can kill the project right there, and the firm will still be able to show first $1 million in benefits. And so this is an example of options use. So it is important to figure out what are the smaller projects, make sure that they make business sense, ensure that flexibility is exercised in a timely manner, and essentially there needs to be some gatekeeping with the kill switch if the project veers off course. And you've got to really figure out and a good way of doing this options thinking is to increase the ratio of may-do to must-do stages in the IT projects. Besides capping losses in high-risk IT project, it discourages over-engineering that actually increases IT complexity. Non-IT managers' contribution to a real options mindset are threefold. A, ensuring that flexibility created by them is exercised in a timely manner, ensuring that baby projects into which project is broken up has business sense, and finally the gatekeeping part. So this is their contribution. So here is an illustration of real options thinking of 15-year evolution of Starbucks prepaid card from 2001 to 2016 on how real options thinking, even without formal quantification, can guide IT investments. And this is in your book, you can kind of look at it. And essentially, we look at all the multiple stages here. 80% of all Starbucks transactions in 2000 were in cash. Store employees knew regular customers, but the company did not. And so the company introduced a Starbucks card, a prepaid card intended to merely speed up the line. Google was barely 3 years old, the iPhone was 6 years away, and broadband was not mainstream yet. Starbucks was unsure about whether such a card would resonate with customers, and so it had a minimal implementation using a magnetic swipe card. Must-do baby project, real options, right? This is not, everything else was may-do. Then they moved on to online registration of that card. Then, because the card was successful, customers bought 2.3 million cards worth $32 million in the first month. Reduced transaction time by 10 seconds, eliminated time in line by almost 1 million hours in the first year. Lowered operational costs, market demand was clear. So in 2002, there was online registration. The customers could now replace misplaced cards, verify balances, add more money to their prepaid cards. Starbucks could have anticipated this, but deferring it to a separate stage capped the losses. If the customers show no interest in the card. Then they moved on to a JP Morgan Chase Visa credit card called Duetto that combined the functionality of a prepaid card, and this was the switch option now, where they could buy it with a credit card without discontinuing the original card, right? This illustrates how switching IT assets to new use, unlike most non-IT assets, does not require killing the original use because of near zero reproduction cost. 2007, we had music downloads, card-linked music downloads for albums played in store. Again, this was a scaling option. In 2008, Starbucks realized the card has become more than a payment method. It became a platform to build insights into consumer behavior, patterns in different geographical markets, store-level foot traffic patterns, and therefore it introduced a loyalty program. This step was an entirely new asset, a loyalty program, and therefore this was a strategic growth option. Starbucks gained a lot of actionable insights, like when it sold most cake pops, which was Friday, where it sold most Frappuccino, San Fernando, California. That's where most of the Frappuccinos were going. This program provided Starbucks with new insights into not just individual stores, but individual customers. It gave them an ideal customer profile from a financial standpoint. For example, Starbucks found that 20% of its customers visit it more than 18 times a month, generate about more than 60% of the revenue. Those that visit 1 to 2 times a month contribute 10%. So then it created its own crowdsourcing platform, And Starbucks figured that most engaged source of new ideas for Starbucks to innovate was to get its loyal customers to suggest and vet ideas for online new products and services. And therefore, people with a Starbucks card started participating, proposed, and vote on other customer ideas. Again, this was a switch option because it created again a new asset, which basically crowdsourcing platform, keeping it intact all the other assets. Within the first 5 years, customers proposed 150,000 ideas, voted 2 million times, led to about 277 new ideas that they developed. Right? An example of an idea was these splash sticks. This impact on drive-through coffee sales had such an impact on drive-through coffee sales that many Starbucks stores did more business at drive-through than at the store. Drive-through transactions accounted for 50% of Starbucks sales by 2015. So then they moved on to smartphones. Smartphones began to take off around 2009. And so then we had the Starbucks mobile for iPhone with the Starbucks interface. Now, doesn't mean that they had to abandon the Starbucks card. It just moved to digital instead of a plastic card. It became digital, and there was a nationwide rollout in 2011 with a successful test run. So this was again a scaling option. It added software on the back end to allow generic scanners at Target stores to work with mobile barcodes. This was a switch option. Same year, it discontinued the Duetto card after 7 years, exercising an abandoned option. And by 2015, more than 40% of all Starbucks transactions occurred to the card rather than cash or credit cards, saving the company considerable transaction fees. So what started as a magnetic strip card intended to speed lines now accounted for $7 billion of annual revenue. So, and so we look at 2015, they had a nationwide mobile rollout, and now you essentially have a mobile pay and order system. And they have, you notice that mobile pay and order systems like Apple Pay and Google Wallet are still struggling to attract customers, users, whereas Starbucks actually it's worked for them. So if you look at if you remember our CUBE framework in chapter 2, this is the digitization of the purchase product. This was not novel, but its success is unrivaled. Within 1 year, it accounted for more than 20% of Starbucks revenue, $3 billion in 2016. Shortened lines, improved throughputs, reduced line attrition, improved productivity of its existing capital assets and employees. It had 12 million active users among its 45 million US customers in 2016, of which 9 million used it every week. So Starbucks now had more interest-free money circulating in its cards, 1.2 billion than most companies have on their banks. So this is a great example of how a narrowly focused IT project created a foundation for a 15-year stream of IT-based business innovation using the incremental commitment approach. The payoff at the first step in 2001 was not a sure thing, but neither could Starbucks have anticipated much of what's going to follow. By focusing the initial step on what could be credibly justified financially, Starbucks avoided an over-ambition trap in the very first step that is met with skepticism and rejection. So real options thinking offers a powerful mindset for taking baby steps. And here you have a bare bones magnetic card project which allowed you to actually end up with all these benefits over 15 years. So to summarize this chapter, IT payoff is messy. There are intangible benefits, impact lags investments. You're not sure whether one IT investment actually causes the benefits. There is a bunch of need for complementary investments. We talked about the IT payoff clock. which tracks lagged operational and bottom line impacts, and we must keep track of the changes and benchmark with its rivals. We talked about the 80-20 rule, that few business-centric IT metrics are cost-effective, competitively insightful, and objectives are worth more than having many. Short-term metrics measure IT's operational impact better, faster, or cheaper in the project's domain, and long-term metrics measure the IT's bottom line impact, both backward and forward-looking. And finally, real options create flexibility under uncertainty, and there are 6 types of flexibility in a project you can inject into a project by decomposing it into smartly sequenced baby steps. And with this, we finish this chapter.